Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, February 4th, 2025, and today officially marks 2 weeks into Donald Trump's second administration. Donald Trump now with an post-inauguration approval rating that 14 days, 15 days into this term is now historically low, despite being slightly higher than where he was the first time around. And the reason why I wanted to cover this is because we actually haven't talked too much about Donald Trump's approval rating besides in the very early on stages where his approval rating was at a record high. But over the past 14 to 15 days, the American public hasn't necessarily soured in a way that is substantive enough to say that it's a massive swing, but there is in fact a decrease in the way that the American public is perceiving Donald Trump's administration. And that could be for a variety of different reasons. Right now, the majority of the nation disapproves of Elon Musk's role in the Trump administration. But even though he is approving higher than where he was in the beginning, back in 2017, ultimately, though, compared to former presidents, this is not the best place to be. Which is actually quite surprising. In comparison to presidents like George W. Bush and even candidates like Barack Obama, the approval ratings, including Biden as well, the approval ratings sometimes don't match to the election results. For instance, in 2020, Biden won his election, sure on the national popular vote, by more than Trump, but electorally by less than Trump. And yet the approval rating has a massive difference between the two, especially when it comes down to the net. Now, Donald Trump has never been particularly a likable person to the American public. Never once has his approval rating or favorability rating been above water, and that has been a challenge for the incumbent president for nearly a decade. He has tried to make the American public like him time and time again, and although he did succeed very much so in the 2024 election in completely turning around the way the majority of the nation viewed him to a point where now it's simply a plurality of voters that view him unfavorably. The first time we've seen that since the 2024 election. This is a significant change for Donald Trump, but he still can't cross that hurdle of being favored nationwide. Again, when it comes down to the way the American public views his approval rating too, you have to look at it from the lens of simply one thing. In comparison to former presidents, being able to narrow this up to about 14 to 15 days into Biden administrations, Trump's first administration, Obama's second and first administration, Bush's second and first, because this really gives you context to the American public as to when people start early on, they generally are given the benefit of the doubt. In this circumstance, it looks like Donald Trump, despite being given more of the benefit of the doubt compared to his first term, still is not crossing that hurdle of the majority of the nation approving of him. And you can see this. The FiveThirtyEight tracker has been able to track the first term as well as the second term, as well as the favorability rating and a number of other things. What we're focused on here is the fact that Donald Trump did in fact start office with roughly 50% national approval. Today it's down to 49. I'm not trying to argue that a 1% change is massive enough, but going from +8 to +5 is not the best direction that Donald Trump wants to go in. But it isn't even that point either. It is expected that any president, yes, including Trump in his first term, should be approved of at this point in time. But he's actually outpacing where he was in the first term. But in the grand scheme, in the grand overall thing, you're looking at the fact that Trump is not approved of by the same amount. And again, we will look at that. In that first term, it took about 14 days. This was actually the convergence point right around here 8 years ago today. Right around February 4th, February 3rd, we were looking at an approval and disapproval that was meeting each other. There were a number of high-quality polls that had been released, and what did they say? That Donald Trump was approved of by the same amount that he was disapproved of. And so it's really interesting to see at this point in time, you're not seeing as much movement. Donald Trump clearly has a much more steady scale and steady hold on the American public and how they perceive him. The media ecosystem is much more favored for right-wing actors, including Donald Trump and his surrogates. And so what we're finding here is that because of that, even if it does seem like Donald Trump is reaching more than he did the first time, which is undeniably true, that he's doing more in the first 2 weeks than he did the first time, which again is undeniably true. Way more executive orders, way more government overhauls, way more, pushes for confirmations for much more not necessarily competitive, not hypothetical, I don't know why I'm losing. Controversial is the word I'm looking for. Much more controversial cabinet picks. It is clear that this second administration is going to be much more on the offensive in comparison to the first one. And I think a big reason for that is because Donald Trump coming in now with the vendetta against the Democratic Party, having survived an assassination attempt. There are so many things that Donald Trump is now hell-bent on that he was not the first time around. The first time was a fluke. The second time, it's vindictive, right? These are the ways that the Republican Party is even branding themselves. You can even see it in the way that Donald Trump on the White House website has his own professional portrait, right? 2017, he's all gung-ho, he's smiling, he's saying, this is exciting. First time we're being elected, we'll do it a second time. This time around, again, Donald Trump, for all intents and purposes, is out for far more. So despite that, right, Donald Trump is holding strong in comparison to where he was the first time. But it was around this point that we saw the convergence happen. But let's take a look. Interestingly enough, you will find that almost every president in modern history has an approval rating roughly 2 weeks into their nomination, into their presidency, that gives you a general understanding of, again, how the American public does, in fact, view people like Donald Trump when they're getting into office the first time. Even controversial and, closely elected candidates like George W. Bush in 2000, who came in, sure, with a very competitive race. Florida was decided by the Supreme Court, yada, 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 all these different concerns around election certification and the Democratic Party potentially winning Florida, but the Republicans getting the Supreme Court to side with them, all these different arguments that were made, and yet George W. Bush fared quite well when it came down to approval. And while it did take a while for that massive approval uptick, and we know that was largely because of 9/11 and his response to 9/11, you will see, though, that at day 14, it was very strong for some of these presidents. So we can actually take a look. Donald Trump's first term, I don't have the Biden numbers up, but I would love to get them. I think we could go ahead and just see how the American public approved of him very early on in his administration. 14 days in, what is today? February 4th, 2021, February 4th, 2025. 18-point delta, right? 54% of the nation favorable view of Trump or approved of Biden, 35% disapproved. So clearly much better than where Trump is right now. A huge difference between the two. But I also want to, again, look at former presidents because we can learn a lot from them, taking a look at the time and also really understanding that our country has gotten to be far more partisan and far more, politically charged and politically divided, that it is very rare for any president to be in a position where their approval rating is above, at most, a 10-point delta. Biden had that, Obama had that, Trump never did, and it doesn't look like Trump will. Now, when looking at the approval rating, for instance, day 14, we can take a look, 12 to 17, I guess that's the jump here. Let's deal with 17 here. George W. Bush had a 51.4% approval. Bill Clinton had a 53.5% approval. No substantive data on George H.W. Bush. Reagan was at 51. Jimmy Carter was right around the, nearly 70%. And Barack Obama was at 61% across the country. These former presidents were in positions where they were approved of much higher than Donald Trump, and I think there's a reason for that. Like I said, Donald Trump came into this situation and into this second administration with very clear-cut goals. He wants to do an overhaul of Biden's DEI policies. He wants to do a complete overhaul of anything that the Democratic Party had passed in the past 4 years. He wants to overwrite birthright citizenship, something that was written into the Constitution. So there's all these different initiatives, all these different things that Donald Trump is saying, I want to reverse the progress that has been made. I'm dropping the T from LGBT, right? All these different things that seem to be more minute and one-off moments on the campaign, or sometimes were the center focus of Donald Trump's campaign, but he is making good on that promise to his supporters that he's going into this with a mission. And while the American public might approve of it more than they disapprove of it, it is nowhere near where it was like under Biden or Obama or Bush. And that's largely because Biden ended up being the president with the most executive orders on day one. That was 8. Donald Trump smashed that record with 26. At some point in time, the American public doesn't positively respond to, the executive overreach that has been largely associated with massive amounts of executive orders. And we're starting to see legal pushback from attorney generals across the country, legal pushback from constitutional scholars that say that overturning birthright citizenship isn't right. And it's all negative press, and we're starting to see the media, revert back to where they were between 2017 and 2021, where they tried to, talk about things in a way that initially were appeasing to Donald Trump and his base, but eventually, and now we're starting to see it, have become much more critical and have called out some of the things that the Trump administration has been doing. And I think that's a big reason why we're starting to see some of the American public really sour, and why, although the approval rating certainly is higher than where it was the first term, I don't think anyone can deny that this second administration is much tighter to Trump, much closer to him, much more loyal to him, and Donald Trump to be fair, was elected by a higher margin in 2024 than he was in 2016. He won the popular vote for the first time for the Republican Party in nearly 20 years. I mean, this is the sign of someone who does have a bigger constituency, does have a bigger voting base than the previous one, so it is expected that his approval rating is higher than the first time around. But the fact remains, compared to every other president in the past 30 years, it is historically low. And that will make a difference for the Republican Party as they continue to navigate, because it doesn't look like there's any way, but further down for Donald Trump. Just as the case was with Biden, just as the case was with Trump in 2017 through 2021. Sure, minute increases, right? From -13 to -8. That's an increase, but you were never in the positive. And it is, like I said, Donald Trump who has been so uniquely unable to make the majority or even plurality of the nation view him more favorably than unfavorably. Because as a person, the American public has never liked Trump more than they have disliked him. And so this will matter as we navigate the next 1,470 so days of this second administration and how voters perceive Donald Trump. The only major difference in covering this administration versus the last one, I did cover the last one, started my channel in June of 2017, covered it all the way up until the end. What we know, as of right now at least, barring any type of constitutional amendment or change or, Supreme Court loophole, Donald Trump cannot run for re-election. And so Donald Trump right now, is not at a point where his name is going to be on the ballot again. He's not going to be able to do rallies the same way. Yes, he can surrogate campaign. He tried that in 22. We watched how poorly that went for the Republican Party. Donald Trump is a turnout machine. And the question will be, can Republicans find anyone who is able to replicate it in the same way? Maybe his son. Maybe J.D. Vance, who has been trying to change his approval, but similar to Donald Trump, has been so uniquely stuck at being unable to have the majority of the nation or plurality of the nation, given that it seems like here 20% of the American public simply does not have a view of J.D. Vance. Maybe they don't know him. It's rare that, not rare, but you will find that there are plenty of voters out there who might not actually know who J.D. Vance is, right? Same thing with Kamala Harris, same thing with Joe Biden under Obama, same thing with Mike Pence. Well, certainly the majority of the nation, the overwhelming majority of the nation is, tapped in enough to say, there are certainly people out there who don't know J.D. Vance and didn't know vice presidents before. But here's the thing. Unfavorable plus 2.9 for J.D. Vance. A lot of what's going to be associated with Trump is going to be associated with Vance. And so the question is for the Republican Party, if Donald Trump is at a point where his approval rating is roughly what it was when he ended his administration last time, 38.6%, 36, 37%, which is probably not the likeliest outcome. I think we'd hover him with somewhere around 42 or 43%, given the historical, trend lines here, but it could also very well change. If it's this bad, J.D. Vance might not even be the Republican nominee, and Donald Trump might not even endorse a Republican candidate in the primary, including his own vice president. I imagine that if Trump had won a second term this election, I don't think Trump would have endorsed Mike Pence. I really don't. I think he would have let it play out. He didn't want to play kingmaker, but also, too, Donald Trump likes to endorse winners. And so I think at the end of the day, Donald Trump wants to be on the right side, the winning side, rather than the losing side. Not to say he'd ever pick a Democrat, but more on the primary end where if it's clear that Elise Stefanik, as UN ambassador, is steamrolling J.D. Vance in the primary and it's a 60-40 race, he's probably going to go with Elise Stefanik, even if it means he's sidestepping his own vice president. So obviously, a lot of things to consider, but we are way early out. I don't want to spend too much time at all talking about a hypothetical J.D. Vance candidacy or Elise Stefanik candidacy, but it's all relevant, because Donald Trump's approval rating matters, and the fact that it remains historically low in comparison to former presidents who have all ended up at different points in their presidencies. Unpopular. You can find that to be true. Every single former president, no matter who they were and no matter how popular they were post-election. Even people going all the way back to Ronald Reagan. At one point in time, Reagan had a 35% approval rating. 35%. Went on to win 49 states. Being president, regardless of what side of the aisle you are on, will almost always result at a period in time that which you are unpopular. Donald Trump, of all the presidents, will certainly not be immune. And the question will be, as more and more of the American public starts to push back against policies, as they start to see the Medicare portal collapse, right? They start to see that they have to call their, students' collegiate institution to ask about FAFSA because there's a federal spending freeze, because there's a federal hiring freeze in different departments, and people can't get jobs in the federal government anymore because they're busy, quote unquote, rooting out DEI. And as people start to become more, feeling unsafe about going to an airport under, Donald Trump being in office and different disasters happening all across the United States, there are a multitude of reasons that I could imagine Trump's approval rating starting to decrease. And I do think it is inevitable that Donald Trump is unpopular nationwide, and that matters. Because starting from this point, we will likely not see it get higher from here. It is possible that if Donald Trump, has a major type of, incident happen across the country where there needs to be a boost in national morale or national patriotism, you know what I'm trying to say here, there is a possibility that, in this circumstance, Donald Trump's approval rating skyrockets in the way it did for George H.W. Bush, for George W. Bush, right? These things do happen. But barring any type of, massive threat to society, massive threat to the American public, Donald Trump's approval rating right now does not stand to show that he will likely end up with a higher approval rating when he leaves office, or a higher approval rating by the midterms. And so we should keep a close watch on this. It will be interesting, nonetheless, to watch how Donald Trump's approval rating fluctuates over time. But as of right now, starting at a historically low place, it might be outpacing his first administration, which obviously ended up with an election loss 4 years later. Although the Republican Party has a much higher mandate this time than last time, they have a popular vote mandate, they have a higher mandate when it comes down to the U.S. Senate, and when it comes down to the overall American public in terms of approval rating, Donald Trump has a higher mandate. But it's not as high as it was for former presidents, and this is likely the highest it's going to be. So as of right now, again, monitor, watch, see how this interacts with special elections and off-year elections, because Donald Trump is going to be the one person that will receive all the blame for any and everything bad in America, the same way it happened for Biden, same way it happened for Trump before, same way it happened for Obama. And given what has been happening in these first 15 days, which have felt like a lifetime, I would say, to the average person who closely watches politics, it's going to feel like far more lifetimes over the coming months, coming years, and the American public may positively or negatively respond to that, and we'll be on the lookout, watching how Trump's approval rating fluctuates over the next 1,400 days. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my post-2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.